Sport Business. Global Sports Intelligence.
Hello and welcome to Inside the Deal. This is the 8th episode in the series, and each month we take a look at one deal, and generally it's not going to be the most valuable or the biggest deal that we've reported on, but it's usually a deal that we think tells us something about what's happening in the industry and the direction of travel, where things are going. Now, this is a deal today that we actually reported on back in September, but we decided to double back on it because we've still been digging, and Matthew, joining us today, Matthew Glendinning, has been digging away, and we now feel we're in a position to tell you a lot more about the deal, particularly on the financials. Matthew Glendinning is our European sponsorship editor of Sport Business. So we're going to be talking about the deals that have been agreed between Visit Rwanda and NBA and NFL franchises in the US. And we're going to be talking a little bit beyond that, looking at Rwanda's strategy more generally, comparing it with that of its neighbors, the DRC and Congo. And then finally finishing off by looking at what tourist boards generally are doing in sport, why they're attracted to sport. So welcome, Matthew. And I should point out we're recording this on the Tuesday after both the Manchester Derby and the Spurs West Ham game. So I've probably got more reasons to be cheerful this week than you.
I find Tottenham crises really interesting. So I'm quite happy when this happens sometimes. I go like from podcast to podcast, like seeing who's got the most intelligent analysis or most poignant gripe. So actually Tottenham being on the brink kind of appeals to me. So I did think that Michael Carrick would not be your best choice. I thought Ollie would be a better choice, but this worked out so far.
Good start. Yeah, I mean, there's an awful lot of column inches being dedicated to the significance of the game, but as a United fan, I don't care about the significance. I just really, really enjoyed battering City. So I'm happy to live on that for the rest of the week.
Yeah, I think battering West Ham, if we'd done it, we wouldn't have got many headlines because we ought to have done a bit better. But, fair play to West Ham. They stuck in there and scored.
Okay, so let's go inside the deal. And I guess the first thing really for me is, having read your piece about this, is to actually understand whether we're talking about a deal, 2 deals, 4 deals, because it's got quite a complex structure. So if we could just begin by explaining, because I'm kind of conscious of Matt Damon's recent comments about distracted audiences, especially when you have complex narratives. And this is quite a complex narrative. So let's break it down. Let's start off. What are the deals?
Right. There are, out of those 3 multiple choice questions, there are 4 deals, not 1 or 2, 4. Although there are 2 numbers associated with those 4 deals, and I'll explain why. The first deal is with the Clippers via the holding company Halo Sports and Entertainment, which manages the sports interests of former Microsoft CEO Steve Ballmer, who owns the Clippers. Although that's one contract, there's a couple of elements to that which we'll talk about later, the patch deal, but also some rights for Rwanda coffee, which perhaps not everyone is aware of. Then we've got a second set, so that's deals 2, 3, and 4, which are to do with the NFL's LA Rams, but also their home venue, the SoFi Stadium, and the wider Hollywood Park Sports and Entertainment Complex. Now, those properties are all owned by 𝘋𝘧 Sports and Entertainment, which is a sports holding company which also owns the majority in Arsenal, the Denver Nuggets, and other properties. But they didn't make just one deal with 𝘋𝘧 Sports and Entertainment. They made 3 deals, one with the Rams, one with the stadium, one with Hollywood Park. So that's as best as I can explain it.
Okay, so I think we're going to have to take this deal by deal and break it down in as much detail as possible in terms of the values, in terms of the inventories, what Visit Rwanda is getting for its money, what we would expect to see around the NBA games and around the NFL games that these clubs are involved in. So away you go. You've got all the time in the world. There's no rush. There's no pressure.
Yeah, I'm not in a sort of one of those ticking minute booths or anything to explain this.
Absolutely.
Good. Right, well, here goes. The Clippers deal, I learnt, or the Halo Sports and Entertainment deal, is around $15 million per year. The jersey patch component, it is thought, is about 12 million of that total. So the rest is the Rwanda coffee deal and other elements that perhaps aren't integrated into the patch deal. So that's 15 million for that. And that is more than double the value of the LA Rams deal, and across the three entities, which we understand is worth $6.2 million over 5 years from 2025 to 2029. And that is, as I say, across the three deals with separate inventory for the Rams, separate inventory for SoFi Stadium and for Hollywood Park. So yeah, it's half as much, but then they're not getting any on-kit branding. And that's, I think, the crucial thing. As we all know, in Europe, on-kit branding is the premium asset there.
So out of all of these things, the single most important thing is the sleeve patch in the NBA.
Yes,
That's
it
the
is.
most
It
valuable
is.
piece of
Because
real
you're
estate.
seen on all broadcast networks, you are seen internationally. Also, one must appreciate that patch deals come in with a lot of sort of, high-end official partner inventory as well. You wouldn't just get the patch, you'd get some of the best signage, perhaps some of the best activation rights, some of the best digital content, so it's not just the patch, but that 15 million will get you all that, but also the Rwanda coffee side of things.
Somebody somewhere in that deal must be getting courtside seats, because every time I hear about a deal in NBA, somebody is getting a courtside seat in there. Is that in there as well?
Oh, that's interesting.
Hospitality or
Well, we'll get to that. I mean, no doubt the Clippers deal will have hospitality. That's for sure. And in fact, for Visit Rwanda, that's quite an important part of their deals, that they want well-off people or well-off businesses to come in and meet them. That sort of personal way of either could be tour operators. It needn't be, someone who's just going off to enjoy what's on offer in Rwanda. It could be the actual operators and the business, the intermediaries. So there's a lot there for Visit Rwanda in the Intuit Dome. I should say the Intuit Dome is the venue for the Clippers, and they've definitely get some good hospitality placements in that. But I think the more stunning, if you like, inventory beyond the patch inventory is with the Rams. So although it's less than half the price, I'd say the hospitality inventory is more impressive. They've got naming rights to a very high-end sort of hospitality area, which they are calling Visit Rwanda Club, imaginatively. They also have another sort of naming space within the stadium, an open air concourse space in a standard seating area. So they're sort of hitting both the kind of regular customers and the high end customers. And then they've got something that looks very space age to my eyes. I'm not quite sure if we've got a signage. So the Rams have, on the other hand, in that deal, there's some very interesting visibility rights that aren't to do with on kit. So at the SoFi Stadium, there's this extraordinary sort of digital signage ring that is obviously above the field of play, but sort of set apart from the top tier of the stadium as well. It's like a kind of horseshoe that goes around the whole ground, and you can see both on the sort of inside and the outside panels. And they've got a lot of advertising around there. They've also got advertising in Hollywood Park. I've never been there, so I don't know quite what sort of footfall it gets, but they even have some rights to do with local shopping. That could be either to have a Visit Rwanda sort of store or outlet, or even some branding in some stores. They have a lot of advertising boards around them anyway, because they're an entertainment site, sports and entertainment site. So, blizzards, presumably, of advertising. So for people going to the game, they'll see a lot of Visit Rwanda, that's for sure.
on the Rams one, just so I can get this clear in my mind. There's three elements. There's the team when it's playing,
Yeah.
there's the stadium, and then there's the entertainment and leisure park around the stadium. And Kroenke owns all three of those
That's correct.
elements.
So
Okay.
you would have
And
thought there would have been one deal, but they obviously negotiate separately. And also one should take into account that sort of SoFi Stadium will be putting on other events, not just NFL events. And famously, they'll be having the opening ceremony for LA 28, which I think will still be within the, obviously I don't Visit Rwanda will have no rights to that. But yes, they put on other events, music events. So, there's probably a reason why everything's kept separate. Hollywood Park, they are separate entities, even though they're owned by the same people.
Yeah, no, I mean, it strikes me as interesting because a lot of these US ownership groups, they do have these kind of vertically integrated structures where they own teams, they own venues, they own entertainment properties around it. I think there are several major US groups that have these kind of portfolios
Yeah.
with multiple properties in there. So I guess in terms of sponsorship, that gives them a lot of leverage in terms of being able to negotiate across these different
Yeah,
verticals. Uh,
often it's like a indoor arena with NHL team and an NBA team. Normally, it's sort of the mix that Cronky has got, which is not only soccer teams and NFL teams and basketball teams, but teams in different continents. They're pretty
yeah.
unique, I think, like that. I mean, I can't think of them. Could be corrected here. I can't think of another sports and entertainment group that does that, apart from say
Fenway?
City Football Group, but only across football.
What about Fenway Sports? Do they not
Fenway,
have?
there you go. Of course, there was that one.
Yeah,
That's a good call.
yeah.
And there may be,
And
and there may be others, but I guess it's pretty front of mind. And that list, by the way, is not comprehensive. They've got a lot more than the clubs I mentioned.
for sure. So this is interesting to me because, I mean, I think Visit Rwanda over the last 5 years has done an absolutely fantastic job in terms of driving awareness. For me, as a football fan, Visit Rwanda is on my radar because I watch a lot of football. And so my association with Visit Rwanda is all based around football. I guess Arsenal in particular because I watch the Premier League more than anything else. And I'm interested in this because for several years they've had these deals in European football. Now they've got these two US franchises. So I guess first of all, if we could just step back, can
Mm.
you just give us a summary of what their investments and what their footprint
Mm.
was and has been and still is in European football? And then maybe try to explain, is there some kind of pivot going on? Is there a change of strategy? Or are we talking about they're broadening their horizons onto a different continent? What's going on there, Matthew?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, the Arsenal deal was first struck in 2018, so quite some time ago. And as you'll remember, most people thought it was because the president, 𝘋𝘦𝘢𝘭, he was an Arsenal fan. So everyone thought it was a kind of vanity project, and he just kind of fancied going over there and maybe meeting the players. And no one took it very seriously. But perhaps surprisingly, it appears to have worked, or at least it's worked enough that he's then added deals across European capitals, which seems an obvious thing to do if you're looking for big areas where there'll be well-off people who might be feel like traveling to Rwanda. So they rather, not him, made a deal with Paris Saint-Germain, a training kit deal which was extended in 2025 and runs to 2027-28. They've got the Atletico Madrid back of shirt rights until 2027-28. They did a premium partner deal with Bayern Munich, which was signed in 2023, which wouldn't have given them kit rights, but a lot of signage rights around the stadium in the top tier. But there was some pushback from Bayern fans on that, and that's been sort of retooled into a Bayern Munich sponsorship where Bayern and Visit Rwanda collaborate on youth development in Rwanda. We'll probably come to why there was opposition from the fans later. So we've got Madrid, Paris, Munich, London. Very, very nice. And we could move on to why they've chosen the US now. I mean, the thing they mention in their on the Visit Rwanda website, by the way, is they have a strategic pathway of what they're trying to do with tourism in Rwanda. They've got a goal they want to hit of $1 billion in tourism revenue by 2029. So you could see that this total sponsorship outlay, which at the moment is above $50 million if we include the US, would be their main marketing play to hit that. It's not unusual for marketers to spend about 10% of revenue on such things. Nike famously about 13%. So it seems like a reasonable marketing outlay. And then to move over to the USA, yes, there are a lot of customers or clients, or what should we call them, travelers, tourists from Europe, but particularly on the West Coast, California, you get more outward-looking people and very well-heeled people. I think you'll probably know more than me. Isn't California supposed to be if it was a country, the fourth richest country in the world? I think that's a fact that our viewers can verify later. There's money there, there's young people there, there's outward-looking people there. it seems like a sort of next step. It's not, when you say a pivot, that doesn't mean they're going to give up their European profile. I think that all makes sense. I don't think it's kind of done. They don't say, well, we're now known in Europe. Now let's move. I think when I said before that they're looking for 1 billion in tourism earnings by 2029. At the moment, or at least in 2024, it was $647 million. So they're part of the way there, but not all the way there. And so it would make sense to me that they would keep their European assets and invest in the US assets. It doesn't have to be either or. So you kind of ask yourself, well, why LA? California, we can see why. Why LA? Well, I think part of it was availability. That Clippers patch has been on the market for quite some time. They've had a real problem selling it. They have had some interesting offers, I understand, and they had a deal fixed for a while with a fintech company that sadly went west. So they've been stuck with that, and that's been on the market for a while. So I think availability was partly the story there. It was the one that was available. The other thing is that if they weren't Golden State Warriors in San Francisco, I'm sure there's a lot of people in Frisco who would love to go to Rwanda. That's got a extremely expensive patch deal with Rakuten, and it's out of their pocket. So if you're looking at California, I'd say LA seems like the smart thing. And to do two in one city, well, there's another aspect of that �𝘯𝘓 deal is that Arsenal have had a relationship with Visit Rwanda for all these years, and Arsenal owned by �𝘯𝘓. So there's that kind of smoothed the introduction there. It's not as big as an investment as the Clippers deal, but that also makes sense. I think LA, it's a major transport hub. If you're going to Rwanda from California, it's highly likely you might fly from LA. I mean, I'm sure there are other destinations. And one last thing, LA obviously has multiple sectors, entertainment sectors, tech sectors, etc. And Rwanda isn't just for individual tourists. They've got quite a nice sort of conferences and exhibitions section of their revenue going at the moment, and they want to increase that as well. So, companies will go over there for an extended stay to have meetings and so forth. I don't see why they need to stop in LA. I mean, if a good property came up in New York, there's another well-off, outward-looking section of the US population who might be very interested. So although the sort of jersey patch rights are taken up there at the moment with the major NBA teams, they might look at football. They might look at other areas. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if they look to New York.
So basically, you said their total spend on sports sponsorship is around $50 million. The two deals, yeah. The two deals that you've outlined in LA come to around $21 million. So that would mean that their football investments in Europe are around $30 million or above $30 million. Of those, it's been reported recently that Arsenal has not renewed.
Yes.
So I imagine that might be a big chunk that's coming out of it. Do we know why Arsenal has not renewed?
Yeah, we do know a bit more about that. I learnt over the summer that Arsenal were asking Visit Rwanda for £20 million. So more than they will be paying in the US. And the reason they were asking for, and that's a big increase, by the way, they were asking for 20 million because they didn't really want to keep, I'm sorry to say, Visit Rwanda, they didn't really want to keep that relationship. It wasn't popular with the fans. So they thought, well, look, if we're going to maintain this relationship, we want to be paid highly for it. Now, I don't know if it was indeed price that ended that, but certainly it was announced that relationship will not be continuing after 25-26. So that was their flagship. It's not anymore.
You touched upon earlier some of the issues around the fans with Bayern and Arsenal and I think others as well. There have been other controversial aspects around their sponsorship. I mean, people have raised questions around things like human rights. But I think we can't talk about the Rwanda investments without widening the picture a little bit. At the moment, there are 3 Central African countries investing in sport, two very heavily, Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Now, at this point, I need to declare an interest in this topic, which is not a financial or economic interest. It's a personal, emotional interest in that our daughter was born in Kinshasa, adopted. So I've been to Congo, I've been to the DRC, whereas I haven't been to Rwanda. So I think I'm likely to have an inherent bias in these conversations because, I think as everybody knows, there's been 30 years of conflict between Rwanda and the DRC, which has been quite violent, quite bloody, and there's a lot of accusations flying backwards and forwards. So it's an area that I need to be a bit careful about. And I think that because we're on a sports podcast and we've got about half an hour, it's probably safer not to try and get too deep into all of the politics. But these are neighboring countries. They've been countries that have been in conflict. And last year, I think it was, the government of the DRC actually very publicly criticized the football clubs in Europe, and they refer to this as being blood-stained money. And they called upon the European football clubs to withdraw from their sponsorship arrangements with Rwanda. The clubs didn't do that. And quite quickly afterwards, DRC started doing their own sponsorship deals. First of all with AS Monaco, then with AC Milan, and then with Barcelona. So, I mean, you could say it's regional one-upmanship, but it also looks a little bit like if you can't beat them, join them. They were actually, I read it from my notes because I don't want to get these numbers wrong, but in descending order of value, starting with Barcelona, the government of the DRC, and I think it's worth it's probably obvious, but I think it's worth reiterating that in both cases, we're talking, whatever the entity it is that's negotiating, ultimately we're talking about government money in both countries sponsoring sport. The Barcelona deal, which runs through to the 28-29 season, it's been reported as being 11 million euros per year. We haven't independently verified that, but that gives the country branding on the shirts with the logo RD Congo, 𝘋𝘦𝘢𝘭 d'Afrique, or Heart of Africa. And there are other developmental aspects around that deal. The AC Milan deal was a bit more complicated because we think it's worth 14 million euros over 3 seasons, and it's split in an unusual way. It's split 2.5 million this season, 5.5 million next season, and 6 million, these are all euros, the following season. And the reason it's backloaded is because this season, and there are complicated reasons in the negotiations, this season the logo RDC, Heart of Africa, is visible only on the pre-match warm-up shirts. So when the players are running around before a game, you can see that logo on the back of the shirts. I understand that from next season, it will be on the back of the shirts in competitive games, Serie A at least, probably in Europe too, and in the third season as well. And then there's the first deal that was signed, which is the lowest value. That was with this AS Monaco in the French league. Similar kind of branding on the shirts, similar kind of developmental aspect that the clubs are helping to develop youth soccer in the DRC. And that deal is worth, we understand, 1.6 million per season. So we've got these deals, and since those deals, then the smaller neighbor, the Congo. So Congo Kinshasa is the DRC. Congo Brazzaville is I guess, put it in the context of colonial history. So what some people would have once referred to as the Belgian Congo, and other people would have referred to as the French Congo.
The big Congo and the small Congo might be another way.
Yes. But they've also done a deal now with Lyon. I don't know too much about that. Do we know any values around that?
We know it's a 4-year agreement. 4 years, that's a pretty good commitment. And it includes branding on the back of the men's, women's and academy match jerseys. So we don't have a number for that, but Lyonnais are one of the big clubs in France. Must be a decent deal, that's for sure. So there they all are. I mean, they make sense, by the way. I mean, when I talk about, London, Madrid, Paris, Munich, now we've got Milan, we've got Monaco, Barcelona, and we've got Lyon. So they're appealing to these big metropolitan areas where they're well-off people who are likely to spend. Because I should add that we can't fully know as to what the ROI is for all these deals, but we do know that they're looking for high spending tourists. They're not looking for backpackers to stay in youth hostels. It's all high-end stuff. You can see how the ROI comes back. But whether your friends at the DRC have analysed it critically, or whether it is a push against their neighbour for some of the reasons you said, I don't know. And I'd be interested to get your view.
What I wonder, I think it's tempting and it's kind of almost inevitable that you look at it in the frame of the conflict. But I wonder whether it's that different, because obviously, I mean, the DRC and now Congo Brazzaville are essentially doing the same thing. They're using sport to try and attract visitors, to try and bring the economic benefits to their country. And apparently that revenue that Rwanda has earned by people visiting the mountain gorillas is absolutely astronomical. So what each of them is doing, and the reason that they're using sports sponsorship is basically the same thing to bring in these high-end visitors. I wonder whether or not the conflict is the only frame for this, because, for example, if you look at, say, the Middle East, the Gulf states,
Mm, mm.
you could argue that what's happening there is basically the same thing. So you've got, Abu Dhabi, and you've got its neighbors, you've got Qatar, you've got Saudi Arabia. They're all essentially using sport sponsorship. They're investing heavily in sport. And one of the reasons for that is to attract high-end tourists. So is it that different in terms of the way sports being used to what's happening in the Middle
Mm.
East, in your opinion?
No, I think you're right. I think that there are definitely firm economic rationale for it. And I can't actually think of the sponsorship where you say, you know, why they're doing that is because they're at war with another country. I mean, that would be quite a leap, I think, even for a government that perhaps had an authoritarian leader or whatever. We'll do that just because they did it. I think the other thing that's interesting is that in terms of volume of visitors, not the high spending, but the volume it's often from East Africa, like Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania. I don't know if when you went to the DRC, you found that there were tourists from local, African regions as well. So they're not just pulling in Europeans.
Yeah, I mean, I only spent a week there, to be honest, back in 2010. So I wouldn't really have any great insight into that. But I mean, one of the things that we visited when we were there, we were staying in Kinshasa downtown, and we went out one day to a nature reserve, which was actually, funnily enough, was originally financed by Brigitte Bardot, the famous,
All right.
the late French actress, animal lover and racist, as we've now all learned in recent times.
Yeah.
But she'd funded this place, and it was a reserve of the bonobo. Now, I don't know if you know too much about the bonobo, but it's a kind of a gorilla type animal, but it's the closest species to the human being in terms of our DNA. I visited a reserve of the bonobo, and it was absolutely beautiful. I mean, Congo, I mean, I imagine Rwanda is the same, but
Mm,
Kinshasa has its issues. It's a huge city. It's got a lot of problems. But as soon as you get out into the countryside, it's
mm,
paradise on earth. It's absolute paradise on earth. And I
yeah.
imagine Rwanda, in terms of the natural landscapes and
Mm,
things, is very similar. But that day that I visited
mm.
the reserve, there were a lot of Congolese tourists there from other parts of the country. So I'm sure
Right,
there is
right.
some domestic and internal
Indeed.
travel there as
And
well.
without turning this into a sort of brochure for either country, I understand that the attractions of Rwanda are the big five in the West. We know what the big five are, don't we? So you've got the gorillas in the East, and they think Kigali is an attraction. They say that there's quite a lot of development in Kigali, and they think that itself is attractive to tourists. So just putting that on the table there, Frank.
Yeah, no, I'm sure that part of Africa is absolutely a stunning place to visit. I'm sure there's a lot of good reasons to visit. But I guess, what I suppose, one of the things that you talked about ROI there before, and I
Mm.
guess just to pull this back and look at the whole thing from the bigger picture, just to round off.
Yep.
I mean, the tourist sector, we did an analysis last year in the sport business sponsorship of tourism and the fact that it's growing and the way that it rebounded so quickly after COVID. And there's just a couple of numbers. Again, I'll have to refer to my notes here because I don't keep them in my head. In that report we did, we said that travel and tourism contributed about $11 trillion in 2024 to the global GDP. Now, that is the total, that includes everything. That includes employment and all of the things on the back of that. But in terms of receipts, in terms of income,
Yep.
the tourism generated in terms of income $1.5 trillion in 2024. And both of those had got basically back to pre-COVID levels and had overtaken pre-COVID levels very, very
Yep.
rapidly. So tourism is an incredibly resilient structure. And these numbers came from the UN World Tourist Organization, or UN Tourism. And they also said that growth in the sector was expected to be at least 5% year on year this year
Mm.
and next year. So it's an above inflation growth sector. And it's one across airlines, across tourist boards, that
Mm.
has invested heavily in sport. Tourism is a massive investor in sport and in sports sponsorship. and probably, for the same reasons across the board. Is it something you think that, I mean, it must be delivering an ROI to these countries, otherwise they wouldn't be spending so much on it?
I think the financial needs of the Middle Eastern countries are very different, aren't they, than the African countries? I think Visit Qatar and Visit Saudi, you sometimes wondering if, I don't want to be too broad in my analysis, but you sometimes wonder if it's Visit Qatar on the shirt because a Qatari owner of a team or want to put in more money into the team, to get round certain rules, how much an owner can invest in a team. But broadly speaking, I think that the Middle Eastern countries are trying to diversify, are they not? So although they're very different stages economically, the African countries and the Middle Eastern countries, their aim is to diversify. And there are many ways to diversify. And obviously from petrochemical revenue, tourism seems to work. It certainly works for Dubai. I mean, Dubai, not only tourism, but property development, which is another sector we should discuss at some stage. Massive development in property and also property developments using sport to advertise that fact. So although I think they're coming from different places somewhat, I think both have strong economic rationales. I would also say that about a year ago, or 2 years ago, I was looking very much at US regional tourism bodies sponsoring a lot of Premier League football teams at a lower level, maybe some US sports when they have their showcase events in Europe. I'm curious, I think a lot of them have retreated perhaps for obvious reasons, that the US tourism itself might be in a bit of trouble compared to some of these other parts of the world, purely because of the internal politics of that country.
Yeah, well, I mean, you mentioned those deals. I think the one that we reported on was the Visit Detroit with Burnley. That was an interesting and surprising deal. But yeah, I mean, I think from what you were saying before about Visit Rwanda, it sounds to me as though they are going to keep investing, keep looking for opportunities, and I think there's going to be more of these deals coming down the line. So I think that's probably a good moment to round off. So thank you very much, Matthew. It's been very illuminating as usual.
Thank you, Frank.
Thanks for your time. And
Yeah.
for our listeners and our viewers, if you want to know what's happening in the sponsorship industry, if you want to have access to sports sponsorship's huge database of deals, deal values, then you can either have a look at the website or you can write to info@sportbusiness.com. So thank you to everybody for listening and to watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.